Your father cut ties with this family a long time ago. We have the $3.8 million apex migration this weekend. If you walk out to cry over a dead man, do not bother coming back, and consider your grandfather's inheritance permanently forfeited. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The text was from my Aunt Vanessa, the CEO of our family business. I was standing outside a hospital room holding a plastic bag with my dad's watch and house keys inside. She completely bypassed any basic human sympathy. To her, my father dropping dead was just a frustrating schedule conflict. I am Claire, and I just turned 31. For the last 5 years, I ran my own independent tech firm on paper, but in reality, I was the invisible spine holding up my family's entire corporate empire. Aunt Vanessa sat in a corner office on the 40th floor, surrounded by imported marble. My cousin Derek paraded around with a vice president title, wearing custom suits paid for by company expenses. I wrote the core code. I built the server architecture from scratch. They took the massive salaries and the industry credit. Every time I asked for fair compensation, they weaponized our bloodline. They called my free labor a family duty. My dad was the exact opposite. He was the arranged black sheep. He ran a tiny, dust-filled clock repair shop in rural Wisconsin. He spent his days hunched over a wooden workbench, smelling of oil and black coffee. He taught me patience. He taught me that real value takes time to build. What the public did not know about Vanessa's flawless empire was that the foundation was completely rotting. I managed the data gateways. The desperate, scrambled wire transfers crossed my screen daily. Vanessa lived like royalty, secretly over-leveraging every single company asset to fund her lifestyle. She personally guaranteed a massive loan to cover her tracks. That $3.8 million apex migration was not a routine upgrade. It was her absolute lifeline. If that migration failed, the bank would trigger a default. They would seize her mansions, her cars, and her precious CEO title. I walked into her glass-walled office later that afternoon, clutching a glossy funeral home brochure. I asked for exactly 4 days off. 4 days to bury my father. Derek leaned against the mahogany doorframe, rolling his eyes. Vanessa looked up from her monitor and delivered that vicious ultimatum right to my face. Her cruelty stung, but the frantic twitch in her jaw gave her away. It was not just arrogance, it was the suffocating raw panic of an executive backed into a financial corner, absolutely terrified that her underpaid niece was about to accidentally pull the plug on her entire fake life. I remember sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table every Thanksgiving. Vanessa used to hold out her empty wine glass without even looking in my direction, just waiting for me to refill it. I was the hired help, the quiet, obedient niece who fixed their server crashes at 2 a.m. and swallowed their condescending jokes. They broke my spirit back then. But today, standing in her pristine office, looking at the frantic twitch in her jaw, the obedience completely evaporated. I am the one holding the hammer now. I forced my face into a blank mask. I gave her a single, slow nod. "Understood," I said. I turned on my heel and walked straight out of the glass building. The brass bell above the door of my dad's clock shop chimed as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of sawdust, old oil, and black coffee instantly grounded me. I set my laptop down right on his wooden workbench. I own the core software architecture. My independent company holds the ironclad copyright. For 5 years, the family business only accessed it through a vendor access key I provided for free. I opened my administrator dashboard. I navigated to the active vendor licenses. 1 click. I legally revoked their access for a direct terms of service violation. Then I rerouted their entire client portal. I replaced their sleek $1 million interface with a stark, hard-coded, undeletable error screen. Service suspended. Legal and license violation by management. Bullies like Vanessa project this terrifying aura of absolute power. They scream, they threaten, and they make you believe they hold your entire future in their hands. But their empire is a complete mirage. It is built entirely on the invisible, exhausted labor of the exact people they treat like garbage. The second you find your worth and legally withdraw your mind, your hands, and your code, the illusion shatters. They are instantly exposed. Stripped of my unpaid labor, Vanessa was just a panicked woman in an expensive suit who didn't even know how to reboot her own office router. 10 miles away, inside that 40-story glass tower, every single monitor simultaneously went pitch black. The $3.8 million Apex migration flatlined. My phone erupted. Not just a single buzz, but a continuous violent spasm against the wooden workbench. Derek sent 14 text messages in 2 minutes. Blocks of frantic capitalized letters filled my screen. The servers were down. The Apex client was locked out. The entire system was completely inaccessible. I swiped the notifications away. Then Vanessa's name flashed across the screen. I answered on the third ring, put the phone on speaker, and set the phone next to my dad's cold soldering iron. Her voice was shrill, completely stripped of that polished boardroom calm. She demanded I reverse the glitch immediately. She threatened to sue me for corporate sabotage. She promised to bury my independent company in legal fees until I went bankrupt. I let her scream until her breath hitched. The silence hung in the dusty air for 3 agonizing seconds. "My consulting rate is $1,000 an hour," I said. My tone was completely deadpan. "I just texted you a payment link. Put a $10,000 retainer on the corporate credit card right now or the screens stay black." She choked on her response. Paying that invoice meant explaining an unauthorized emergency vendor expense to the board of directors. It meant admitting she didn't own the software running her own company. It would expose her utter lack of operational control. The line went dead. I went back to organizing the tiny screws in my dad's toolbox. An hour passed. Heavy tires suddenly crunched on the gravel driveway outside. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off the shop's dirty windows. 2 police cruisers parked diagonally, blocking my car. Vanessa had actually escalated. Desperate to hide her financial ruin from the investors, she weaponized the local police. She falsely reported me for cyber terrorism and the theft of corporate property. She sent armed officers to my house right in the middle of my mourning period. She banked on the sheer terror of shiny badges and the threat of handcuffs to break me. She expected a frightened, grieving girl to just hand over the multi-million-dollar code to make the authorities go away. I swung the front door open. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. They demanded immediate access to my hardware, citing a felony report of corporate theft. I reached into the entryway drawer and pulled out a single manila folder. I handed it to the lead officer. It contained the state-certified business registration and the federal copyright documentation for the software architecture. The documents were stamped and dated 3 years before I ever logged in to the family servers. The officer scanned the pages. He checked the vendor identification against the police report. He closed the folder and handed it right back to me. My phone was still sitting on the console table. Vanessa was breathing heavily on speakerphone, just waiting to hear me break down and surrender. The lead officer leaned down toward the microphone. His voice dropped an octave, turning to absolute ice. "Ma'am, this is a civil contract dispute. If you use emergency dispatch to bypass a vendor payment, I will personally drive to your office and arrest you for filing a false police report and misusing city resources. Do not contact this woman again." He hit the end call button himself. The cruisers backed out of my driveway, taking Vanessa's last desperate threat with them. The real trap was already springing shut. I never drafted an email to the board of directors. I made the client do the destroying for me. At exactly 2 o'clock, the executives from Apex logged into the portal to initiate their $3.8 million data migration. They hit my hard-coded error screen. They read the words legal and license violation. Panic is highly contagious. The Apex executives immediately dialed the family board of directors. They threatened to pull their entire contract and sue the family empire into the ground for gross negligence. Inside the boardroom, the crisis meeting was brutal. Vanessa sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Sweat pooled at her temples. Her hands shook violently as she clicked her mouse, desperately trying to pull up a backup server that simply did not exist. Derek shrank into his leather chair, staring blankly at his expensive shoes, completely mute. The investors demanded the truth. Cornered by the Apex executives and her own board, Vanessa had to look those billionaires in the eyes and confess. She had to admit she never actually owned the core software running the company. She had to admit she lied to the shareholders, lied on the bank loan applications, and just triggered a multi-million-dollar breach of contract because she refused to let her niece bury her father. She built her entire identity on being the untouchable matriarch. Now her makeup was smudged, her voice was cracking, and she was begging for a second chance from men who only cared about the bottom line. The board held an emergency vote right there in the room. They stripped Vanessa of her chief executive title, effective immediately. They dissolved Derek's vice president shares on the spot. Their empire collapsed before dinner. Security escorted Vanessa out of the glass lobby that very afternoon. She walked through the revolving doors carrying a single cardboard box. Her custom designer suits and vice president's son could not save her from the millions in personal debt she now faced alone. The board of directors called my cell phone the very next morning. They bypassed the family bloodline completely. Instead, they signed a multi-year, highly lucrative licensing contract straight with my independent company. The Apex deal survived. The family empire, as Vanessa knew it, shattered into pieces. Thursday morning was cold and crisp. I stood in the quiet, grassy cemetery in rural Wisconsin. A handful of my dad's old friends gathered around his simple wooden casket. Nobody from the corporate tower showed up. They were too busy fighting off bankruptcy lawyers to pretend they cared. I stared down at the fresh earth. A strange, overwhelming peace settled into my shoulders. People always tell you that turning your back on family is the ultimate sin. We are conditioned to endure the abuse, to keep showing up at the holiday dinners, and to bleed ourselves dry just to keep the peace. But standing there, the truth hit me with absolute clarity. Walking away from Vanessa and Derek was not an act of cruelty. It was the highest form of self-respect. Blind loyalty to a toxic bloodline is just self-betrayal with a polite label. I never struck a match to burn their empire down. I simply took my hands off the pillars and let the massive weight of their own arrogance crush them. Cutting that cord was the exact moment I finally honored my father's true legacy. 4 months later, the federal bankruptcy court finalized the liquidation of the family holding company. Aunt Vanessa was formally indicted on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of falsifying corporate records to secure the $4 million commercial loan. To avoid federal prison, she accepted a brutal plea deal, taking 5 years of strict probation and a court-ordered restitution of $2,500,000. The social fallout was absolutely merciless. The elite country club she treated like her personal kingdom quietly revoked her membership. The high society friends who used to drink her imported wine suddenly forgot her phone number. Cousin Derek was forced to sell his custom sports cars at a public auction. He now works a mid-level data entry job, reporting directly to a manager half his age. 6 months after the funeral, a pale pink envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a modest apartment complex across the city. Inside was a handwritten letter from Vanessa, 2 full pages of flowing cursive dripping with manufactured nostalgia. She wrote about how much she missed our family dinners. She wrote that my father would want us to reconcile, claiming she pushed me so hard only because she saw my true potential. I stood at my kitchen counter holding the thick parchment paper. The familiar, suffocating guilt I used to carry was completely gone. My chest felt incredibly light. I folded the letter in half, dropped it directly into the trash can, and walked away. No angry reply, no closure text, just absolute, deafening silence. My independent firm expanded rapidly after securing the direct Apex contract. We hired 12 new engineers, moved into a beautiful office space, and finally built a culture rooted in mutual respect. The greatest victory, however, is that my weekends finally belong to me. I spent Thanksgiving this year hosting a dinner for my chosen family. My lead developer, my college roommate, my husband, and my dad's old buddies from the clock repair shop all crowded around my dining table. We ate off mismatched plates. We laughed until our ribs ached. Not a single person asked me to sacrifice my peace for their profit. Society constantly conditions us to believe that family is a sacred, unbreakable bond.
People will look you in the eye and say that blood is thicker than water. What they hide from you is that toxic individuals will use that exact concept as a weapon to extract your labor, demand your absolute compliance, and drain your sanity. They do not love you. They love the endless utility you provide. If you are exhausted from carrying the weight of ungrateful people, write these 3 rules down. Rule number 1. DNA is merely a biological fact, not a lifelong VIP pass to disrespect you. You do not owe your mental health, your financial stability, or your peace of mind to a shared last name. Rule number 2. True power is simply the ability to withdraw your invisible labor. You do not need to scream, you do not need to seek vicious revenge. You just need to cleanly and quietly stop fixing their messes. Bullies are terrified of personal boundaries because their entire survival depends on exploiting yours. Rule number 3. Peace is incredibly expensive, but the cost of staying is your soul. Losing my grandfather's inheritance and shattering the illusion of a loving family was a heavy, painful price. It bought back my autonomy. Have you been playing the dedicated fixer for a family or a company that would discard you the second you prioritize your own life? What invisible, unpaid labor are you giving away today? Drop a 100 in the comments if you have ever had to walk away from toxic bloodlines to save yourself. And share this story with someone who desperately needs the courage to finally send their own invoice. Most people scroll past stories like this. The ones who subscribe are the ones trying to change something inside themselves. If this made you stop scrolling, subscribe to get more stories like this every day. I am Claire, and for the first time in my entire life, I am completely free.